What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Masters of Modern podcast. I'm your host, Ben Bateman. Today, because Alex Kessler is not here, I'm here with Rene, who you guys all know from the show previously and also from doing all of the back end, all of the social media coordination, anything you see of our show that exists on the internet, basically, Rene is handling. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for being here and joining me as the co-host on today's episode.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's awesome.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking to you guys about a handful of different things. There was a really fun tweet that we got to put up last week that had a ton of interaction, and it's a fun and interesting conversation that we're going to have on the show today. But a couple quick shout outs. Patreon.com/the MMcast. Thank you guys so much for supporting. We really just appreciate you guys. You know, there's always an extra 10 to 20 minutes of unedited footage of the full show that goes up early. You guys can go check that out. That's available. And a big shout out to our sponsors, TCG Player. Thank you guys so much. And of course, you can listen to our stuff on Channel Fireball. That's where you can still hear the show. We're excited to be there. If you ever do check out at TCG, make sure to use our checkout code, which is the MMcast. I hope I'm right about that. Alex is not here, so we're going to say that's correct.
And there's a link in the description.
Link in the description. There you go. Yeah. It changes all the time, guys. I'm just the color guy, okay? The color commentator. No, I'm kidding. And then, of course, finally, the last piece of this is we have a great partnership with Ultra Sleeves through our Patreon, which if you are patrons through the month of January, you get 4 of these sick lightning bolt altars, which is like me and Alex, and they're like Star Wars characters. They're great. They're really cool. And I'm very, very appreciative that we have them. So there's our shout outs. We're going to get into today's episode. We're so close to Phyrexia United? What's it for? Dominated? What's the new set called?
Obi-Wan.
That's the one. Yeah. Not Dominaria United. Guys, I'm just terrible with names today. I'm going off the cuff. But we're really close to that. I have seen a couple things get out there. There was a couple cards in particular that I'm really excited about, but we'll start to be in preview season very soon for that. But I think the thing this week that we wanted to talk about, and this was a really interesting conversation, is last week on Twitter, we asked the question of if you could make any non-legendary creature in Magic's history legendary, what would your choice be? And there was hundreds of responses. And a lot of them were very interesting. And I think it gets into a conversation about what makes a card dangerous or not dangerous as a legendary creature. I mean, what do you think are the defining characteristics of a card that is dangerous when you put the legendary on? Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
I think that's a very interesting question. And the reason I say that is because you have cards, for example, like Deathrite Shaman, which, spoiler alert, is my first pick to make legendary, to make it a commander. But if you look at the aggressiveness of how Deathrite Shaman was and the bannings that it took through Modern, I think that card at the time when it was in Return to Ravnica was not a point for it to be a legendary creature. I don't think Commander was a thing at the time. It wasn't, I'm sure Wizards wasn't designing legendary creatures as much, right? Like a Deathrite Shaman to hey, let's make this card as well as let's make it a Commander as well. I don't think that was the thing. But then you have the power level like Ragavan, right? Where that blatantly is a card that can only be legendary because if you have 2 Ragavans on the board, it's game over, right? Ragavan is just something that is just so powerful that to me is the basis of what a legendary creature is supposed to be now. But there's so many creatures that are like that aren't as powerful as Ragavan, but definitely have the stigma of being like, it could definitely be there, but it wasn't there yet. And I think that's a lot of what the old cards did, right? Like a lot of the old cards have that design where we can make it somewhat strong, but not over the top because we can't make it a legendary. So I don't know. I think the basis would be Ragavan, I guess, is where the idea of what legendary is supposed to be now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that stands out to me that I find so interesting about the conversation is that if you look at the design of a card like Deathrite Shaman or Ragavan, when they are 1 CMC creatures that have a ton to offer, they are very good in competitive formats. We've seen both those cards dominate competitive formats over the years. But the thing is, as soon as you introduce a table full of players that have a chance to respond, the power level diminishes very quickly. Even Deathrite Shaman, if Deathrite Shaman was legendary, if we try to think about, does that dangerous in terms of power level if Deathrite Shaman is? And the answer to the question is, well, it's going to come down on turn 1. in every single game that you play it. You're always going to play it on turn 1. In theory, you're playing a deck with fetch lands, so you can accelerate, and you can accelerate with any of your opponent's fetch lands, the ones that they're playing. But aside from that, I mean, it's not really much better than playing like an elf or a bird or something on turn 1, which, like, granted, if you got Birds of Paradise on turn 1 in every single game of Commander ever, maybe that would be too good, but that against a full table of players, that's not too good. And even the effects the Deathrite Shaman offers, they're very good. I think it would be powerful, but by no means do I feel like Deathrite Shaman is oppressive if it's a legendary creature for Commander. And in paper, it's even worse, right? The card just becomes worse if it's legendary because you can't play multiples. In 1v1, I mean. So I think the thing when it comes to what makes a creature dangerous if it's legendary, I think it's more things that are inherently going to be good in all situations. There was a whole article that came out, like this whole conversation, about the new Elishnorn that was previewed, and Sheldon wrote this article about it, and Sheldon Menery, and talked about the process of evaluating the card with the RC, and how there was a lot of pushback on the card amongst them before it was previewed or before they decided to print it. A lot of that conversation was about the fact that it's just inherently good against everything, right? Like, there's so many things it's good with. It makes basically all of your opponent's decks worse, and it makes every single effect in your deck better. And but the responses in many cases were like, it's a 5 CMC creature that doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield. Like, like, how can you say that that's dangerous? Like, if you should be able to kill a 5 CMC creature that doesn't protect itself or do anything when it enters, counter it, kill it. Like, and so I think it's very hard to truly come up with a commander that is dangerous by putting the legendary sticker on it.
Yeah, it's the idea that a lot of these older creatures aren't legendary is obviously, there's a reason why, right? Based on design, like you said, Deathrite Shaman as a 1-of in your command zone just doesn't seem as powerful as you were to play 1 or 2 against, in a modern matchup, But the stepping away from that, I think there's a lot of creatures that just wouldn't benefit from the fact that they're legendary. One of the ones that I saw was Goblin Guide. Goblin Guide as a commander, I think, would be pretty awesome. But you also have to remember that Commander just isn't the only format that they print to, right? That they design cards for. So
very much
where's that line where you say Goblin Guide is good enough to not make it legendary, but because it's not legendary, you can't make it a commander, and it's just not. There's like it's kind of hard to explain. Like, I feel like I'm a little tongue-tied right now because I have these ideas of what I think a good legendary can be, or actually maybe more what a fun legendary creature can be. Because I would love to play Goblin Guide as as my commander, right? Like, just a turn 1 swing for 2, see what's on top of the deck, and it's just, I think that's a lot of fun. But I think that there's definitely a line where you don't want to cross overpower. But then, because even Ragavan as a commander just isn't as strong as it would be against a 1-on-1, right? So by that argument, is it even worth making a legendary, right? Maybe you remove one of the abilities and it just becomes just the new Goblin Guide over the fact that it's the new Ragavan, right?
Well, on the other hand, and this is something, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of people try to explore this. I was interested at one point in trying to build a commander deck around Ragavan, using Ragavan as my commander. What's interesting about that idea is that because it's against, in theory, 3 players, you're going to play Ragavan on turn 1, which means that you're almost 100% of the time going to accelerate into 3 mana on turn 2, because there's almost a 0% chance that all 3 players are going to have a blocker for you by turn 2. It seems pretty unlikely.
Sure.
So that means that you are getting the turn 1 Birds of Paradise effect. It doesn't require you to have a fetch land in hand or somebody else to crack a fetch, which is what Deathrite does. And it's restrictive because it's in mono red, but it's also going to start drawing you cards very quickly. If you build your deck around that, which I've thought about doing, I mean, imagine playing like Ragavan on turn 1 and a card like Assault Strobe or anything that's going to give it double strike. If you just Assault Strobe on turn 2 on attack, now you're going to get 2 treasures on turn 2 and you're going to exile 2 cards. So now on turn 2, you're going to have access to, because you've cast the Assault Strobe, 3 mana and potentially 2 cards off your opponent's deck, right? That's and that's super easy to do. So I do think that there are certain types of effects that if they're pushed too hard, like the fact that Ragavan's one color is one of the great things that holds it back from, I think, being kind of an oppressive commander. Because I do think if it was more than one color, it probably would start to get pretty out of hand. Like if it had an ability on it, had an ability on it, I think it would be kind of dangerous. But I think my answer to that question comes back to the Elish Norn effect, which is like, if that Elish Norn card was less expensive somehow, if it cost like 3 or something, or if it had like a shield counter on it, maybe, or something, if it had some way to protect itself, then I think a card like that, stacks cards, I think just in general, by inherently could be really dangerous to print as commanders. Because I mean, if you think about some of the most famous commanders that are played in CDH, like Najeela is a good example. Najeela just has like a built-in infinite combo, right? Like it's so. I don't think there's any way you print a card like Najeela not knowing there's a chance it's going to get abused, right? I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, I think so too. It's kind of like the argument with Golos, right? The fact that it's just a 5 generic mana ledger that lets you just tutor for your best land, and then you just you go off on your next turn by just tapping 7 mana and just playing the best 3 cards off the top of your library. I think is pretty bonkers, right? But Ragavan, I think I've seen Ragavan play at a table before, and granted, I personally feel that the power level of Ragavan against on a 4-player game definitely changes, because when you see a commander at the table, for example, if you see a Maelstrom at the table, you're going to know that, this person more than likely is going to be playing something big. Or you're going to see somebody playing a Blue Red Spellslinger deck. More than likely, I'll probably do something off the top, because maybe I can rock a Brainstorm off the top of their library. But then you have somebody on the other side who's playing the new Shauna from Dominaria United, who's getting a bunch of life. The odds of them grabbing something worthwhile with that Ragavan on turn 1 is pretty light. I have definitely seen Ragavan go off based on other people's cards, but if it doesn't happen for them, it just becomes a 2-1 on turn 3, because by then you're already playing, because CMC 3 and 4, I think, are like the bread and butter in Commander, and at that point you just have blockers for days. So it's an ongoing scale, because when it comes to card design, you need to find out when can something be too powerful in Commander but not too powerful in Modern, or vice versa, right? Or Standard or Pioneer. Right. It's just, sometimes I think it's super awesome that we have game design now where a quarter of a set is catered for Commander, just like Elish Norn. Because let's be real, we're more than likely probably not going to see Elish Norn in Modern. I was trying to figure out a way to play it in Amulet Titan. I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. I can try to figure it out, right? But that's more like a pet card at some point, right? Kind of like when I play Elder Gargaroth or the 7 mana, the Titan of Industry, right? Like those are just pet cards I don't want to try to play in my Modern deck, in my Amulet Titan deck. But in all honesty, there's times where those things just get phased out. That is a Commander card at its finest, right? The Sithis, the green-white enchantment creature, that card, even though it's a 2 mana creature that Enchantress did really well for the first couple months when Modern Horizons 2 came out, that card is just a Commander card at best, right? So there's definitely a scale there. Like, if you took away the legendary part from Sithis, would Enchantress just be as busted in Modern? But then that card doesn't exist in Commander, right? So that game design just doesn't. There's a fine line there. And when do you know when to cross it to make it really powerful? So I think Ragavan, like I said, if you take away the legendary part, it just becomes bonkers, right? That's a banned card on site. But because it's legendary in Commander, I don't think it's as good as, like by seeing it, it's not as good, right? But I mean, there's a lot of cards out there that I think can deserve the legendary stamp on it. To turn into Commander is going to be a lot of fun.
I think the drawback on Legendary is actually so much more marginal than it seemed like. It's such a small percentage of the card's value. Like Ragavan having been Legendary hasn't really affected its playability in any Eternal format whatsoever, right? Like it's the fact that like that's supposed to be a drawback on it has basically no bearing on the card at all.
People don't play it any
less
because it's so funny because when we saw that card, I was like, oh, I think it's a Legendary. Oh, let's put a drawback on this card and make it a Legendary. It's like, okay, guys.
I think when I've thought about, when I've thought about how could this card, and I've talked to various like Wizards employees at different times about the interest in this card, and just like sort of the thought experiment of like what could have been different about it. The only thing I can come up with is that I think it could have been a 1-1. I think you could have made Ragavan a 1-1 instead of a 2-1. I think the
I think
card would
so.
still be
Yeah.
just as good. It'd be
Yeah.
just as playable. I don't think it would have basically any difference. Maybe like a really aggressive deck would be less interested in playing it, but I doubt it. Like the fact that it comes down and it, it's like you could do that. I mean, the other thing you could have done is like you could have made it a 0-1, and it could have made a treasure on attack.
Yeah.
Would have just made a treasure on
I
attack.
think the drawback of making it a 1-1 or a 0-1 would probably be more impactful than making it legendary.
Yeah. I mean, imagine what if Ragavan had been a 0-1 with dash, and the treasure was made on attack, and then it had fire breathing. So and it still you still got to flip a card if you dealt damage, which means that you attack with Ragavan, it makes the treasure. Now you can use the treasure to put 1 power on it, and that's how you get to exile a card. Such a worse card at that point, because to get the extra card you need to attack. So again, they could have made it a 1-1 that did it on attack, has to deal 2 or more damage to get a card, then you sack the treasure. There's a lot of different like sort of design space you could have tweaked. The version they printed is very clean. But anyway, that's not really the conversation. Getting back to the initial part of this conversation, it's about legendary creatures and the drawback or the value in making certain creatures legendary. So I'm going to pull this tweet up. Deathrite Shaman, I think, just to kind of continue that conversation and maybe wrap it up before we move on to the next one. One of my favorite Magic cards of all time.
Card's so good.
The like short answer. I mean, I don't know if I know you listen to the show when you're working on it, but we had a conversation. I can't remember if it was on air or off. The 5 most powerful 1-drop creatures of all time. Ragavan's probably number 1. That's pretty clear. I think Deathrite is probably number 2. Those are the top 2 in my opinion.
I agree.
And then you get into Dragon Rage Channeler is really, really, really good. That's like one of the best ever. Birds of Paradise is one of the best ever. I think that's probably a top 5. And then maybe you're talking about like, maybe like Mother of Runes or something like there's, I don't know, like Delver.
I would probably argue that DRC is probably a step ahead of Deathrite Shaman, just because it's the ability to surveil is just so powerful nowadays. But I think overall, I think Deathrite Shaman would definitely nerf DRC if it was still in the format. So I think there's like a sliding scale, right? It depends on what's in the format at the time. But I definitely agree with you. I think all 5 of those creatures are definitely creatures that probably the best 1-drops. Now the question would be, what if Mother of Runes was a legendary creature? Like how much worse would that card be?
Probably not much.
Yeah.
Situations I can think of in my life when I've played a 1v1 format and I've had a Mother of Runes in play and a second one, like you don't often need more than one. I mean, you obviously can do the thing where they are able to protect each other, kind of a thing. It's an extra line of defense. It is relevant.
Yeah.
But if you have too many Mother of Runes stuck in your hand, even if you just have 2 of them, honestly, often your deck doesn't have enough velocity. Like the formats that are profiting the most off having Mother of Runes, they don't really want a second one. They want that card to be a trick. They want that card to be power. 3 of them, for instance, you have nothing. You wouldn't know what to do.
There's nothing else to do. Yeah, I think Mother of Runes would be a cool commander. I think that would have been a cool legendary to play, because then you just earn protection from anything at the point that you need it, right? So that'd be pretty fun. I think Mother of Runes would be really fun to play.
Yeah, it's also like a cool idea too, because of the way that it functions with the card design nowadays, with Teferi's protection and stuff like that.
I think that would be super awesome. Yeah,
in line with in line with white. So let us know, guys. If you have a different opinion about the 5 best 1-drops, those are the ones that immediately come to mind. I mean, I know there's others that in different times in Magic's history have been really, really good. Right, like we said, Delver at one time was really good. It's been totally outclassed. It's not really much of a card that people play anymore nowadays. The same can be said for like Nimble Mongoose. That card is like pretty outclassed nowadays. You have cards like Carrion Feeder or Viscera Seer that are both really strong. They both offer a lot in their color. But I really do, Weathered Wayfarer. I mean, there's cards that are interesting, certainly. But I think that first 5 we mentioned, the pound for pound nature. Birds of Paradise is so good. I mean, Noble Hierarch is really good.
I agree.
But I think Birds is like, just the core 1 mana, no complication, 5 color, really, really, really strong.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely up there. Definitely probably the 4th or 5th best 1-drop. I agree. Yeah.
So looking through this thread, I'm just gonna start to throw out cards. So one that I've seen on here a lot of times. We asked this question on Twitter. You guys can go follow at the MMcast on Twitter. You also can go follow on TikTok. Renee has been doing a lot of really cool stuff on there. A lot of these interactive questions like this go up on there. You'll see clips from the show. We do trivia segments on the show. Sometimes those will get clipped up on there. And it's our TikTok is at the MMcast podcast.
The Podcast.
The Podcast. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
at the
Podcast. It's the MMcast everywhere else, and then we're at the Podcast at TikTok.
Yes. So Soulfire Grandmaster was one of the first ones that shows up. It appeared on the thread a lot of times. For those that don't remember it, it is from, I think, Fate Reforged is what I want to say this set is, with the 2 backwards hooks on top of each other. It is a creature human monk for a white 1. It's a 2/2. Instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink. And then for 2 and then 2 blue-red hybrid mana, the next time you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand this turn, put that card into your hand instead of into your graveyard as it resolves. So Soulfire Grandmaster was a card that I remember when it was previewed and printed. I was super excited about this card. I loved this card. I wanted it to be good so badly. I was never able to make it good. I saw people years ago, back when Jeskai Control and Modern was like a big deck. This is like 5-6 years ago now. 7 years ago, maybe. People would play Soulfire Grandmaster sometimes as kind of a pet card in that deck. It never broke through, but people would do it because, you're activating end of turn, get a Lightning Bolt or a Helix back in hand or something like that. Ultimately, the ability cost is just too expensive, the 4 mana, and having a 2/2 for 2 that dies that just, obviously, like Lightning Bolt having lifelink just inherently after you cast a 2/2 is really strong. That's like a really good thing you can do. It's good against certain decks, but the card never broke through. And to be honest with you, I've not seen a lot of Soulfire Grandmaster played in any format. It's not a card that shows up very often.
I think because of the color identity is what makes the card, and that's a different argument, right? For like hybrid mana, when can you put hybrid cards within a specific decks and stuff? But I think that card is, in my opinion, just 10 times better than Fire Song and Sunspeaker. You have the ability to get into Jeskai, which is something that I believe Fire Song and Sunspeaker is lacking. The fact that it's lacking that 3rd color, I think if this were a legendary creature, this would by far be one of the strongest Spellslinger decks you can find, just because the fact that your spells have lifelink. It's just very smart. I think like Aetherflux Reservoir would be really good in something like this. The fact that you can Swords to Plowshare for 2 mana, right? You pay 1 to give us a spell lifelink, right? Is it 1 mana or 3 mana?
No, I think the spells have lifelink just on their own.
Just on their own. Okay.
Control have lifelink. For 4, you can get the spell to come back to your hand after you cast it.
Yeah. So the fact that Swords to Plowshare not only gets rid of a troublesome creature on the battlefield, but also gives you life is utterly amazing, right? Path to Exile, the fact that you're going to gain a life as well, like it's just all that stuff is just utterly amazing. I think that card would be awesome as a legendary creature. The fact that you can build around it so well and have access to blue. Think about gaining 1 life just for brainstorming. Like that is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I think there could have been adjustments. Now, had the card been legendary, there's a couple things about this that I think are especially cool. If this card had been legendary, I think it's one of the places that people bring up a lot in this thread. So the idea that you can cast it for white, but you have blue and red in the color identity, means that you can, as long as you're basing the deck around white, you'll always be able to hit your commander on turn 2. And at that point, it's so easy for you to play a Jeskai control deck, just like a super fun Jeskai control deck. There's like the sheer amount of cool spells you'd be able to play, and you can really lean the mana into base white so that you're hardly ever going to end up in a situation where casting this on turn 2 is hard because the deck has leaned so hard into blue and red. Not to mention, you can also just build a deck that doesn't need its commander. It doesn't like it's not a turn 2 commander deck. It's like a turn 6 commander deck. When you play it, you've got 4 mana open to cast multiple spells or something like that. The one thing about it that I do think is a little interesting is, and I've learned this lesson from a lot of the Commander games I've played. It's not as easy to build spells decks that kill everybody at once in the traditional way you want to play. You have to have support cards for that to work. To be able to kill all of your opponents at once using like economical spells that for 1 or 2 mana are going to deal damage and draw you cards, you have to get really clever. Like I play this Gerson Starn card, this from Warhammer 40k.
Yeah.
And the way the deck works is Gerson Starn, for those that didn't read it, is basically just it's a blue-red commander that whenever a source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a creature or a player, Gerson Starn then tacks on 2 additional damage. So, if you play Gut Shot, it's going to deal 3 for Gut Shot. If you deal something that does 1 damage to each opponent, it's going to deal 3. If you do Fury and you split your Fury between 4 different targets, it's going to do 3 to every one of those targets. It's going to do 12. So the way the whole deck is built is that I have to have other support cards that are going to deal 1 to everything or everybody, that once Gerson Starn's in play, it amplifies that. Right. But that's not like spells that are doing it. It's the support cards that are making my cheap spells do that, because Fire Ice or some card like that isn't really good enough. If you're playing that in a Soulfire Grandmaster deck, that's never really going to be good enough. You're never really going to want to pay 2 mana to like deal 2 damage and gain 2 life and be down a card. Like the effect is just not powerful enough. Yeah. So I think that burn spells by and large just don't they don't scale well enough unless you're playing really big expensive ones. And if you're playing big expensive ones, you'll just get blown out by interactive decks. So that's, I think, the sort of maybe the drawback on the idea.
Yeah, I think it could be, but I think what after listening to what you had to say, I think that it would be interesting to make the fact that incidental life gain is such a big such a big thing in Commander now. I think people misconstrue the idea that gaining life is irrelevant. Like it really is. Yeah, I mean, how often do you play Voltron decks, right? Like if you do play a Voltron deck, you're gonna play 1 out of the 4 at the table. So you're just playing a Jeskai control list with a commander that lends itself to that shell, and you have the ability, every time you counter something, you're gonna gain life for it. Every time you get rid of something, you're going to gain life for it. You can bounce something. It just becomes a Jeskai control shell with a commander that I think is easy to remove. Now, I think if you made it too white, it'd probably be a little easier to make into legendary, because the drawback isn't being legendary. It's the fact that it's double white, right? I think that would probably be the biggest thing that you would have to do to make this creature viable, to make it into a legendary.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. So that's the first choice, is Soulfire Grandmaster.
I would go with the one that I would love to see as a commander, which is something that Alex and I have talked about before, because I'm a big component of this card because I try to play it in Modern often, is Knights of the Reliquary.
I love Knight of the Reliquary.
Yeah, green white 1 for a human knight 2/2 that says it gets +1/+1 for every land in the graveyard. You can tap it, you sacrifice a forest or a plains card to tutor for a land. This, to me, is the epitome of what I want to do in Commander. I love lands. I love the ability to play lands. The fact that I can still play Life from the Loam in a Knight of the Reliquary deck would be awesome. The fact that you can sacrifice a forest or plains to search for a Yavimaya, and then now you can sacrifice anything you want. It just creates a toolbox that I absolutely enjoy. Now, granted, you can't play, like Vault of the Archangel, which I think is an amazing card. But obviously there's checks and balances. Obviously, you don't want to overpower it. But you can even look for sacrifice a forest to search for one of those. I forget the name of it. Rogue's Passage. And by the time you're there, you're swinging for 12 commander damage, right? Or you can do or Life from the Loam, and you do all the cycle lands. There's so many cycle lands in the format now that you can just cycle away through everything. And then maybe at some point you have a toolbox of like a Rampaging Baloth or Avenger Zendikar. I personally love to see Knight of the Reliquary as a commander, to the point where I was telling my fiance Shay that I'm going to build a Green White's lands deck and then just rule 0 and see if anybody lets me play Knight of the Reliquary. And if not, I'll just find some other Green White commander to play. But I think that card would be absolutely great as a legendary, in my opinion.
I mean, for a lot of years, it was one of the best creatures ever printed. It was got kind of outclassed as time went on. We play a format called Highlander Gauntlet. We've talked about it here on many times. It's 600 card decks, and you balance no repetitions between the 6 decks. And I have a green white deck in that format that I play. That's like, it's kind of like Infect.
Okay.
It has a few Infect creatures. It's basically green white all in double strike Infect pump spells. And it's a 1v1 format. So but I have found that playing Knight of the Reliquary, when it comes down, it's a little slow, but it just sets up these just big swing turns. You can do so much for the Knight. It's like it's just the amount of good lands that are out there. The fact that they come in untapped. So many spell lands that like do such cool stuff. Whether it's you're talking about like a Sajiri step for protection, or you're talking about there's the Threshold land that turns into a giant growth. There's the one from the next one, I can't remember what set it was from.
You can even do Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead, Vesuva the Field of the Dead. You can do, oh my gosh, the new Capenna lands, the ones that won the ETB. As soon as it enters, you sacrifice and search for a basic land. Like, I think there's 2 or 3 of them that you can play because you can search for a forest or a plains. I think land taxing all 3 cards and just discarding 2 lands, I think is absolutely amazing. I think Knight of the Reliquary, maybe it would be too strong as a commander.
Here's the next one that I see listed on here that I think is really cool. Heartwood Storyteller. I love this idea. Green 1 for a 2/3 tree folk from Future Sight, of course. It's near and dear to my heart. Whenever a player plays a non-creature spell, each of that player's opponents may draw a card. So it's an old weird card from Future Sight. There was a whole bunch of cards like this, rares that had just like strange, complicated, wonky abilities. But this is just a big group hug card, It's just whenever anybody plays a non-creature spell, their opponents can draw. Like it turns every commander game into just everybody's drawing a million cards. Which seems fun. It's mono green though, which is especially cool because now it means that in mono green you're setting up basically a situation where probably you're playing a mostly creature heavy deck. Is the guess. Like you're probably playing mostly creatures. And your opponents are probably playing more non-creatures than you, and you're mono green. So now you have a way to draw when your opponents are casting spells, right?
Yeah. I think that'd be pretty great. I think it'd be a little scary to see something like that as a commander, because if you were to see that as a commander, you know exactly what they're trying to do. I think that card kind of explains itself. So if you, if I'm playing blue-white control or his Ballsinger deck, I'm like, well, he might have to be target number 1, because at the end of the day, if he allows everybody else to draw cards, that's going to make it harder for me to kind of do my game plan, because it's basically a risk study for everybody else. So
yeah, but what's cool about it is because it triggers on non-creature spells. I believe it's whenever a player, right? Whenever a player plays a non-creature spell. So it means that if somebody immediately targets your commander, you draw, right?
Yeah.
You immediately get to draw off if they're targeting your commander. It replaces itself. So even if they kill it right away, you're still you and everybody else are still ahead of them on cards now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because you're basically you're losing a card and they're gaining a card just by getting rid of your commander. So I guess those are pretty good odds. But how would you build around it? What else would you do to make that deck powerful?
I think because it's a creature and because it's mono green, you probably play like just like a bunch of sweet green beaters.
Yeah, just mono green
like
good stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a creature ramp deck, and it probably doesn't play almost any non-creatures. And so every single other player is just going to basically allow you to draw. The whole table is going to be drawing, including you, and whoever's playing the most spells to try to get around it is going to be drawing the least. So I do think there's some fun stuff there. I mean, I don't know necessarily how you would build around it, but it just seems like a kind of a cool, fun effect. I like the pick there. Let's see, Den Deco is who suggested that one. And then there was a handful of different suggestions on Soulfire Grandmaster, but Alex Nornapologist was the first one that I read there. So wanted to shout that one out.
You did mention earlier about how your Highlander deck was a green-white. In fact, how do you feel about Blighted Agent being a legendary creature?
Fascinating idea. I think it makes the card significantly worse for what it is intended to be. Because I think it's a pretty unique card in what it does for an infect strategy, and we've already seen with the previews now with what's it toxic is what the new ability is called.
Yeah.
And what toxic, it doesn't scale. It's like whenever it deals damage, you get one, so it's not as powerful. It can't be abused as easily. If it's legendary, then I think for like modern, I think the card gets a lot worse because you definitely want to be able to play multiples. So if they kill one right away, you can immediately get it down. Because I don't know if mono blue commander blighted agent is a deck that's going to be able to get the job done in commander. There's not enough blue pump that I think you would be able to consistently get that. Like you could certainly play some stuff. Like I think what would come to mind for me would be you'd be playing a spell heavy deck with like Runechanter's Pike, or you'd be playing like stuff like that. That would, I think you'd be trying to push it over the top there. You'd probably have like Unstable Mutation and other stuff that'd be able to pump 3 at once so that you could sort of one shot one player at a time. But I think as soon as you have a blighted agent suited up with Runechanter's Pike for like 7 or 8 power, you just become target number one.
Yeah.
And then you're mono blue. So if they kill your commander, what's your deck doing? How are you supposed to win? It feels like the whole deck would be centered around having your commander in play.
I would probably do it the opposite. I would do a lot of cantrips and swords. A lot of swords. I think that's what I would do more. Like I'd Sword of Feast and Famine, Batterskull. I even do Hearth and Home. I would do Body and Mind. I think I would just go overrun with the ability to just force them to deal with this one blighted agent, because a 2-mana 1/1 with Infect that's unblockable, I think already is good stats. And as a commander, to just equip a sword to this thing, you're just on a 2-3 turn clock, and then just holding counter magic, counter spell. Even Remand would be really good, just to hold off on your commander, just so they can hold on to it. I think it would be pretty. That's probably the way I would go with it. It's kind of, I would actually go that way with Ragavan too. It's just like sword my commander, just kind of get as much as I can out of it. But I do think the fact that it's mono blue definitely has a huge drawback. And you're right. I think in modern it just wouldn't be as efficient as it is now in Infect.
How do you feel about the fact that they nerfed Infect a little? So do you know how Toxic works? I haven't read it carefully.
I do not actually. I believe Toxic is kind of like poison, but I'm poisonous, but I'm not 100% sure how it works. But it just the fact that they're nerfing Infect, I think is the right thing to do. I played in Standard when Infect was during New Phyrexia, and it was a very interesting time, because to play a turn 1 Glistener Elf and just like mutagenetic growth it 3 times it just kind of, that's not the style of game I like to play, me personally.
Yeah.
So I think you either do it 2 ways. I think you either need to up Infect to 15, or you just have to nerf the ability in general. And I think a lot of people online don't like I think it's kind of like it's a scale, because a lot of people who don't like Infect want it to go up to 15, then the other ones just wanted to keep it at 10, right? So I think it really just depends on how you feel within just the shell of Infect. But hopefully Toxic will do something for Infect and Modern, because I think that's a very fun deck to play. I don't think it's overpowered. I think it definitely needs maybe a piece to really kind of go over the hump to become tier 1 again, but we'll see.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so continuing to move through some of these answers that were in the Twitter thread. Let's see here. Some of these cards are so fun. Other ones that jump out at me here. More Soul.
You know what we should do? We should do a scale. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We should do a commander stream. Like, we should put the top 10 cards that we love the most that we think would be great legendaries, and have everybody on Twitter vote for it. And then the top 4, we should all build decks for it and play on the stream.
Play those cards. Yeah, that's fun. Really fun. I like that idea.
I call that out of the Reliquary. So
yeah. The next one on here is Risen Reef. So Risen Reef shows up a few times here. Benji the Brewer threw this one in. So Risen Reef, blue-green 1 for a 1/1 elemental. It's from M20. Whenever Risen Reef or another elemental enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it on the battlefield tapped. If you don't, put the card onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. So I think one of the things about Risen Reef that's so interesting is that elementals, by and large, are most powerful because there is no color restriction, because 5 color elementals is essentially the lean. That's where people go.
Mm-hmm.
You have all the free elementals that you can pitch spells for, the 5 of them from Modern Horizons 2 that are really powerful. There's evoke cards from the previous sets. There's a lot of really good elementals, but a lot of what makes elementals really good, and a lot of the, it's you're pairing them with cards like those I mentioned, the Omnaths of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the kind of deck you're talking about. If you're restricted to playing blue green, if Risen Reef was a legendary, I think it's really fun. I think it's a really, really fun, easy way for blue green to just kind of dumb its way into a big board state that I think is really fun. There's tons of elementals, but there's not so many absurd elementals in those colors that you would have to work at it for the deck to be good, I think. But it seems really fun to me. I think elemental tribal is something that's been pushed, and it has some drawbacks where some people kind of consider it to be a little unfun because there's so many free things. But you don't get that many free spells in this deck. You get a couple free spells, and everything else is just value. It's all value, value, value.
I really like the idea. But I think one of the biggest positives of playing Risen Reef is the fact that you're in, especially in Commander, is that you're able to like write a replication, kick a write a replication and make 5 copies of it.
Right.
The fact that you have the ability to just abuse it is what makes Risen Reef so powerful. I definitely like the idea of making it a legendary, because Commander to me, and I think I spoke about this with Alex in the last episode I was on the podcast with, but I think Commander has become this format where it's convoluted with staples, right? So you have to play these, you have to play this, you have to play this. I think I love Companion in Commander, and I think Companion kind of gives you an opportunity to open up your card pool to look for things that don't always necessarily make the cut because it's not good enough. So when you nerf a card like Risen Reef and you make it a Commander, I think it really does open up the ability to look for all these other cards that might just not have been as good in your 4 or 5 color, in your Omnath deck, right? Or your 5 color elemental deck. So I think that would make it a lot of fun. But I think it also takes away from what the strongest part of Risen Reef is to be able to copy it and just net so much value off of that one card. But it would also be cool because you can make Karuga your companion if you had Risen Reef as your commander. So there's a lot of plus and minus.
There's a lot of stuff that I think when you're talking about building a commander deck that is super cool. And I think it's some of the stuff that is most interesting about Magic and Magic design and puzzle solving. I think it's why I've taken to it so much lately is it does allow you to look at cards that would otherwise be forgettable that I will never play in any format, right? Again, talking about this Garrison Starn deck, a lot of the stuff that I was paying attention to was like, okay, so any 1/1 that I make is able to attack an opponent. When it attacks, it's going to deal 3 instead of 1. So, okay, things that make 1/1s just sort of off to the side become a little better. It's a spell deck because I want to be able to trigger all of the Keswick Flamebreakers and all the Thermo Alchemists of the world, because that's kind of how I'm trying to win. But it also means that like Third Path Iconoclast and Young Pyromancer become really good because those cards are all making 1/1s. Now my 1/1s all come down there, they attack for 3. So I take a card like Occult Epiphany. I don't know if you remember this card, but it's blue X for an instant. Draw X cards, then discard X cards. Create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying for each card type among cards discarded this way. So it's a sweet way for me to end of turn in this deck, filter through my deck, choose, probably discard a land, some like piddly sorcery, probably get myself 2 or 3 1/1 flyers, trigger all my guys because it's an instant speed spell, and because it's X1, if I just need later in the game to just draw a spell that I'm going to cast for 1 to trigger a Thermo to deal the last 3, I can just cast it for 1 blue. I can save it as the last spell in the chain. I don't actually need to cast it for anything. But so it's interesting because I will never play Occult Epiphany in any deck, except for the fact that in this particular deck, it does represent a lot of damage at the end of turn in a way that I think is really, really cool and unique. And I think that's maybe one of my favorite parts about Commander. And when you talk about making some of these creatures legendary, I think it's not just the creature itself being legendary that's so cool. It's what happens if that creature becomes legendary. What weird corner case cards then become actually playable,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes Risen Reef a very interesting case. I actually think Risen Reef might be, in my opinion, the most interesting case that we've talked about right now, just because of the sheer power that this one card has by not being a legendary. But then if you make it a legendary, the opportunity that we have to just make something so out of the ordinary, right? Like it's just to me, it just seems like it would be a lot more fun. It seems like it would be pretty interesting. Pretty interesting to make something, to make a Risen Reef a legendary. That'd be a lot of fun.
So we only have time for one or two more. Do you have any others immediately that come to mind for you?
I think we talked about this off air. I think Goblin Guide would be really interesting. 1 mana 2/2 Goblin with haste. Whenever it attacks, target opponent reveals the top card of the library. If it's in land, it goes into their hand. Otherwise, it stays on top. I think that card would be super awesome. But again, I think outside of Commander, it would just be a worse version of it. Would just be a worse version. But I think as a Commander, I think it would be really fun to kind of just see what everyone else is going to draw into. The ability to just possibly make somebody discard lands because they just drew into too many lands. It's just kind of what you do in Modern, right? With Goblin Guide, or even in Standard, when it was in Standard. Like, I drew 2 lands, I got to discard more cards, Yeah, so I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, I think Guide probably ends up getting outclassed, like you said, by several other creatures. I think it doesn't do enough on its own.
Yeah.
I think to justify it, like I think the building restriction would be so great at being mono red that getting 2 damage, essentially, if you think about it from the perspective of like, if you're not going to deal lethal commander damage to someone, then it be effectively Raging Goblin, but worse.
That's true. Yeah.
And that's a pretty rough commander. One idea here that I think is really an interesting conversation for us to have. So Robert Lewis here, Robsto109, responded with Ornithopter.
Interesting.
So that's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating idea because you're already in the colorless category, so you're having to get really clever with how you're going to do this. The building restriction is insane. But at the same time, you're going to have your commander for nothing on turn 1 every single game, always. You're always going to have your commander. Now, it's weird because some of the stuff that having a commander on turn 1, you don't benefit from any of the free spells. None of the you can cast this for free if you control your commander.
No.
But there is something like really fascinating about fast mana acceleration in the colorless sense, in the Soul Ring, the Mana Crypt, the Mana Vault, the Grim Monolith, all those types of cards where you're going to be able to cast everything in your deck with those things always. You're probably an equipment deck. You're probably like a kind of a stacks deck too, is my guess. Like
Torpor Orb and Winter Orb, and I think you'd want to be
Torpor Orb, Winter Orb. I could see like playing like Tangle Wire. Like my thought with this. You'd be ramping out these like just as many permanents on turn 1 as possible to try to suit up your Ornithopter, and then like, I guess you can't play Cranial Plating in the deck because that's got black on it.
You wouldn't be able to play Cranial Plating. I think
you can't play
the fact that you can play Urza Saga to make constructs would be pretty cool. To tutor for like a Shadow Spear, I think a 0/2 0 mana commander that just gets buff, right? I think is pretty cool. And the cool thing about Ornithopter being a commander would be that it's always net positive. You're always, it's because the fact that it's 0 mana. So you don't always need to do it turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. Whenever you're ready for this Ornithopter to swing, that's when you cast it. So in my opinion, you create a net positive commander. Now the argument would be that maybe Memnite would be better.
Maybe because it's got 1 power. I think I like the idea of Ornithopter being the choice though, because it has 0 power. I think that's what's so clever about it. This is probably a true affinity deck. This is probably like the Frogmite deck. It's like you're probably, but the only weird part about it is, how do you refill your hand? How are you going to get? You probably need to be playing like, this is probably a what's the 4 mana portal from our first conspiracy? Coercive portal. This is probably a coercive portal deck. It's probably like you probably are playing Cloud Key for artifacts. You're probably playing like Foundry and not Foundry Inspector. Is it Foundry Inspector? The 3/2 artifact that makes your artifacts cost 1 less.
Foundry Inspector, Joe's Familiar. There's a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably playing all of those
Mm.
cards, like, and you're just going big mana. I mean, I think,
Filgri familiar, the one with the ETBs, you gain 2 life
yeah,
when it dies, you draw a card. There's a new version of that card, so
that
you
card's
can play
sweet.
both
Yeah.
of those. Yeah, that card's super sweet. I play that in my Tashar deck. That card's
It
awesome.
seems it seems like a lot of fun. Most of the support cards that I think about playing in a heavy artifact deck you can't play, which is sort of strange.
Yeah,
But there are really weird and interesting combos that you can do. Obviously, you can play Karn and Mycosynth Lattice. That's a thing you can do. There's a tremendous number of busted things you can do. It
I
stacks things.
I think Michael Synthlatus and Karn would be your game winner. In the fact that once your Ornithopter is ready to go, that's when you Michael Synth and then you Karn Great Creator to just they can't do anything, right? Like, okay, it's over. Now I'm going to swing with my Ornithopter. That's, I don't know, a 21/21 because of all these swords and all this stuff. And yeah, that would be a very interesting deck restriction. It actually seems really fun. It
Yeah,
seems
I
like a lot of
agree.
fun because then you also have access to like the Eldrazi's at the top end. I don't know if you'll ever get to that top end, but you have the ability
Yeah,
to play Kozilek. That's the one that draws you cards, right? Yeah, both Kozilek's the ones that let you draw back up to 7 or let you draw 4 cards.
yeah.
Yeah, I think at the top end, I don't think you want to overdo it at the top. At the top, maybe just the 2 Kozileks. Anything that allows you to draw cards that are colorless, I think would be great.
Yeah. All right. We're going to do one more. You either
Okay.
have one or should I pull one more out of here?
Yeah, let's pull one more. See what we got.
Okay.
Seems
Let's
fun.
pull one more out of here. See if there's
Okay.
one that comes to mind that's really especially cool. Fiend Artisan. This is a cool one.
Yeah, that's a good card.
So two double green black hybrid mana for a 1/1 nightmare. Fiend Artisan gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. And it has a black green hybrid X tap cost. Sacrifice another creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library, activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So it's a little bit of a public enemy number one situation as soon as you play it, because we've all played against the survival of the fittest fauna shaman type of decks, and those ones have to actually cast the creature. This one gets to one time sacrifice to get a creature directly into play. But in a
Yeah.
black green shell, you're probably a combo deck, is my guess. Everybody who plays playing against you probably knows that you are some sort of a rampy combo deck. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how this deck is good if you aren't a combo deck. I feel like you're almost never attacking with your commander.
So I play Fiend Artisan. I played it for a long time in my Marin deck, and I thought that, oh, cool, a second birthing pod. But in all honesty, the fact that it's I think it's a 2/2, right, or a 1/1 creature, but before the
It's a
pump,
1/1 for 2.
yeah,
Yeah.
a 1/1 for 2. It's actually not as strong as birthing pod actually is. I think Fiend Artisan is a really interesting commander to really build around if you wanted to, but I feel that it just turns into Marin. I think you just create aristocrats, and I just personally think that there's just a better commander out there than a Fiend Artisan would.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably right. I was trying to think about cards that, well, I mean, it was in the thread here obviously, but I was trying to think about cards that would allow you as a commander to tutor and tutor and win as a
Yeah,
combo deck.
yeah.
And there are some that tutor for things quickly and easily, right? Which is it Hannah Weatherlight Captain, or no, that's Hannah's the one, the green white one, right? That can tap to search for a legendary.
No, it's Sisse Weatherlight Captain.
Okay, Sisse.
Yeah.
Hannah maybe is the one that gets back an instant or an enchantment artifact from your graveyard. So like Sisse is an example. There are some certainly that have tutor built in. But there aren't that many, I feel like. And this one being cheap, it's also the thing about it that I think is also a little bit of a restriction is that you have to sacrifice and pay the mana. So it's
Yeah,
not like it's not that strong, right? It's a little slow, and it's also only sorcery speed.
yeah,
So it really doesn't feel like it's overpowered. It just feels like it's an engine card that's cheap enough that it can
yeah,
come down. It's almost like I feel like the cost of the card and the power level of the card might be low enough that people might kind of let you get away with it.
yeah. I
You
like the
know?
idea, but I think I'd rather because I saw the thread. Obviously, I was going through the thread earlier, and some of the cards I think are really interesting. But I think when there's just a better commander for the archetype that you're trying to go around, it just wouldn't be worth building around that card, right? Like, for example, in a Golgari shell, I just think Marin would just be a better card, because then you can put Fiend Artisan in the 99, because not only do you have that, now you have Birthing Pod, right? I think that just makes a better idea. But if you're looking to really tutor, if you're really to combo, I think Fauna Shaman as a legendary would be a lot stronger than a Fiend Artisan would. Now, granted, it's a monocolor card, but I still think it would just be a lot better, because now you're able to filter and find the thing that you need at that time. It becomes mono green. It's like a Vidalcan Ori was attached to a commander, right? Because once you activate it, let's just say you're to my right in turn order, whatever's on the board, that's what I'm going to tutor for. I'm going to discard this Golgari Grave Troll to search for whatever I need at the time. And I think Fiend Artisan is just a worse version of what Fauna Shaman is. Even though it's 2 colors, I just think you'd rather play Marin, if that's the case.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. But I do have one while we were talking about that, I actually think that Kitchen Finks would be pretty cool to play.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, that would be really cool to play as a commander, I think. Yeah.
That's a fun one, because it's I like that it's the 2 colors. I like that obviously you're able to gain life. You gain life every time it comes into play.
Yeah.
You can combo with it. You can have things that trigger and are better off of gaining life.
Yep. Malira. I think with Malira you just go infinite.
Yeah, as a Malira deck, I also think that like you could play it in a Soul Sisters type of deck pretty easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Green White has been pretty famous for doing that. Yeah. You curve into your Ajani's Pride Mate, your Sarah Ascendant, your Essence Wardens, or your Soul's Attendant, all these cards, and then you bring it down on turn 3, triggers everything, and now every single time your commander, you can block with it. You can. I mean, I think there's a ton of cool stuff you could do with Kitchen Finks.
Yeah, I think Kitchen Finks would be a lot of fun to really try out. Yeah.
And now that nobody plays it anymore in competitive 1v1, who cares, right?
Yeah, who cares? Just make it. Yeah, they should just make it legendary now. Not other Reliquary and Kitchen Finks should just be legendary at this point.
Right? Exactly. That's what happens. 3 CMC creatures in green that just aren't good anymore.
Just aren't good. Yeah, it's so crazy to think that Tarmogoyf is irrelevant in the format now. Like it pains me to see something like that.
It's basically not even played, right?
No. And I know Alex will defend Tarmogoyf until the day he dies, but it sucks to see that a card that powerful has been pushed out, has been overpowered. And it's crazy to think that a card like that is so strong. Let's make that into a legendary then. Let's make Tarmogoyf a commander.
Exactly. All right, guys. I think that is going to wrap up our show for the week. Thank you, Rene, so much for joining me and having this conversation. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think are the 5 most powerful 1-drops of all time? If you could make any 3 commanders or any 3 non-legendary creatures into legendary creatures, what would they be? Be sure to like this video, leave a comment below, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll be back same time, same place next week. We'll be talking Phyrexia All Will Be One, spoilers, and all kinds of fun stuff going on there. So, and also if anybody is planning on going, Alex and I are definitely going to be in Philly. We're going to be there. It's in just like a month and a half now, 6 weeks. So we'll see you guys. If anybody wants to. Yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be super, super fun.
Yep.
It's going to be a great event. And yeah. Where can the folks find you if they want to follow you?
You can find me at Rene the Great on all social media platforms. You can also find me at halfstepdownpod on every social media platform. halfstepdownpod. The Half Step Down podcast is anywhere you get your podcast except for YouTube. And then you can also find me at the MMcast. You'll more than likely be talking to me on Twitter or TikTok. And yeah, so just drop a line. I'd love to hear from you guys. And if you guys have any ideas of what we should do for the next couple of weeks when it comes to content, let us know. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And maybe we will do that Commander stream with new legendary creatures that no one knows about yet.
Sounds fun to me.
Yeah, we'll put that up to a vote. That'll be fun.
All right, guys. Thank you. You can find me at Ben Bateman Media, everywhere you can find people on the internet. I will see you guys same time, same place in a couple weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.